first one is from Habakkuk, the first chapter. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. The wicked hymn in the righteousness, so that justice is perverted. And then from the Gospel of Matthew, the 5th chapter, the 9th verse. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, I had finished my sermon, so I turned on TV. And the news was on, and it was breaking news. Someone had shot Donald Trump at a campaign rally. And then they went to President Biden's remarks, and Biden said, political violence has no place in American politics. I want to agree with him, but he needed to add something to that statement because it's not quite correct. Political violence has no legitimate place in American politics. Then we look at our history. We've had 4 presidents assassinated. We've had just as many or more attempted assassinations of presidents. We even began our journey as a nation in violence. The American Revolution was not a peaceful act, and it was political violence. And throughout, even at lower levels, violence has continually crept into American politics from time to time. Again, it's not legitimate, but it has unfortunately been a part of our political history. So what do we do about it? And I don't just mean what do we do about it as Americans. I mean, what do we do about it as Christians? Well, the first and obvious answer is we reject it. We say it's wrong. Now, that's easy. Right? We all agree political violence is wrong, no matter which side is committing it. We solve our disagreements. We decide our political fate with ballots rather than bullets. So we say we will not be a party of it, we will not use it, and when others use it, we will condemn it in the strongest possible terms. What else can we do if we call ourselves followers of the Prince of Peace? What else can we do if we follow the teachings that say to love our enemies? But those are the simple steps. Now, it's shocking to me how in places the church has not been able to follow those 2 simple steps, to reject it and condemn it. There was a church in Michigan that's made the news because they're having a raffle as a fundraiser. Not a problem. They're raffling off a semi-automatic rifle, an AR-15. I don't know about you, but something strikes me as odd about that coming out of a church. I have heard Christian leaders call for violence. I have heard Christian leaders call for violence against their political opponents. And not just pray that something bad will happen to their political opponents, but actually pray that somebody will do something violent to their political opponents. They lost focus someplace. They lost their way as to what it means to be a Christian. I don't think we have. But it's a sad enough testimony that so many in the church have. Like I said, those are the easy parts, to reject it and condemn it. Here's the more difficult parts. We cannot be silent. We cannot pretend that it does not affect us and that we don't have the responsibility to speak. We can't laugh when our friends joke about it. It's not a laughing matter. Any jokes about political violence, again, no matter which side you're on, are in incredibly bad taste. We cannot just let it go. That is our witness as a church, that we are called to share. We are called to be in the world, but not of the world. Which means we cannot ignore the world and say, well, that's just another terrible thing that's happening in the world. Yes, it is. But we're called to speak about it. We're called to speak for unity and against division. Because the assassination attempt yesterday sprung from seeds that were planted years ago and have been watered and nurtured through divisive rhetoric in the news media and from politicians. I'm not blaming any one side here, I'm blaming both sides. Fear and division sell. Unity and peace are boring. Violence is exciting. It's dangerous. Peace and quiet is boring, but you know what? Maybe it's just because I'm older, but I kind of like peace and quiet a little bit better. I remember when I was working up at a church camp. Now, I made the mistake of not telling my boss that I was afraid of heights. And he's got me going around changing lights. Now, standing on a step stool in the cabin and changing the light is one thing. Getting on the 26-foot extension ladder to change the light on the pole is something else. I managed to do it. And I was grateful that there was no excitement when I was changing that light. There's an old Chinese curse that goes, "May you live in interesting times." You know, because terrible things are interesting. Another thing we have to avoid and we have to call out is don't speak about what you don't know. Almost immediately, even before the echoes of the gunshots had faded, there were people posting online about the suspect and their motives. And at that point, we knew nothing about the suspect or his motives. And many of the people who posted have now found that the things they posted couldn't be further from the truth. Don't feel we have to get out ahead of the story. Let the facts be learned before we speak, before we pass judgment. And finally, there are two more actions, more things we can do. One is the greatest strength the church has, and that is that we pray. Pray for peace for our country. Pray for unity for our people. Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for all of the others." We're not perfect. We'll never be perfect because our government is made up of people and no people are perfect. But I happen to agree with Winston Churchill that whatever flaws democracy has, it is the least worst form of government. Maybe terrible at times, but it's better than anything else we've come up with yet. But when people choose to use fear and encourage violence, when politicians tell us, vote for them because I hate the same people that you hate. When politicians look at Americans who believe differently than they do and say they're the enemy. I love Ronald Reagan on this. Ronald Reagan was once asked after he retired about what he thought about his political enemies. And he said, "I don't have any." They go, "But you fought with Tip O'Neill all the time. He was my opponent. But he's an American. He's not my enemy." We have political opponents, not enemies. The majority of Democrats and the majority of Americans and the majority of Republicans love America. The majority of Democrats and the majority of Republicans believe that their ideas and their policies are best for America. Now, we may believe that one side or the other is wrong, and that's fine. We may oppose them and their policies, and that's fine. But we cannot turn them from opponents to enemies. And the church must take a lead in this. Now, praying, unfortunately, when we pray for peace and when we pray for unity, we only do half the job. But I've told you many times before, and it's especially true now, prayer is not just speaking to God, it's listening to God. And on matters this important, our prayers for peace and our prayers for unity must allow ample time for God to speak to us. Because unity begins at the local level. Peace begins at the local level. And that's where we are, at the local level. This is really nothing new. We're not just called to respond to what's going on in our country, but the way that we are called to respond is the same way we have always been called to act as a church. To be a city on a hill, to be a light in the darkness, to call those living in darkness to come into the light, to call those who are lost to be an example of how God's children can live in peace with those with whom they disagree. Our closing hymn is number 232.